Hello Internet, it's me Josh, the Aging Gamer. So, salutations to you all. It was around this time last year that I did a video talking about the Nintendo Entertainment System. That console was my introduction to video games, and in that video I talked a lot about that. I talked about being a kid, being introduced to video games, growing up with it, how decades later I eventually got back into retro gaming, and then I even talked about how I started my channel. I thought it was a fun little video, and now I think it's time to do a follow-up. Today, I want to talk about the Sega Genesis. By the time I got my Genesis, I was a little bit older, a tiny bit more mature, and that was the system that just really got me invested into being a gamer. It's a system I hold near and dear to my heart, and I just have so much Sega greatness I want to talk about. So let's do another story time with the Aging Gamer. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my life growing up with the Sega Genesis. So the Sega Genesis, or the Sega Mega Drive as it's known in most places outside of the US, was released in 1989. I didn't get mine until a little bit later. I was still rocking the NES for a while. Now, from what I remember, it was maybe around 1991 that we really started seeing the whole console wars in effect. It was the Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis, with the TurboGrafx-16 around there somewhere. Sega's advertising got pretty ruthless, what with its classic Genesis does what Nintendo don't slogan.
Genesis does. Genesis does. Genesis does. Genesis does. What Nintendo?
And all its catchy commercials.
Sega! 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 Sega!
Coffee? Tea?
Sega!
But all in all, I wanted a Sega Genesis over the Super Nintendo for one particular game that we'll get to in a moment. So the year was 1993, and I was trying my best to save up money so I can buy the Sega Genesis. For my birthday that year, I only asked for cash so I could afford the system. And praise the almighty video game gods above, I was able to afford that purchase. In September of 1993, the Sega Genesis was officially mine. For whatever reason, I didn't buy the console at a Toys R Us, Circuit City, Good Guy, Sam Goody, KB Toy Store, Kmart, Sears, or any other defunct retailer. Instead, I bought the console from our local video rental store, which I think I bamboozled myself because I didn't know any better, I was a little kid, but the console system that I got was just the core system. Yeah, no games or anything included, just the single console and a gamepad. No games, no Altered Beast or Sonic 2 for this guy right here. But I did have enough money to purchase the one game that persuaded me to go to the Sega side in the first place. And what game was that? Why, it was none other than X-Men. I've only mentioned it, a few dozen times on this channel, but X-Men was one of my favorite things as a kid. I loved the comics, the trading cards, the action figures, the animated series, and everything else X-Men. So having an X-Men game where I got to control 4 different X-Men was a dream come true. I got to slash the holy hell out of people with Wolverine, blast baddies away with Cyclops, bonk villains with Gambit, and kick the shit out of bad guys with Nightcrawler. There was also a lot of cameos from a bunch of other X-Men. This was awesome. But, I gotta admit, even back then, as much as I like kicking ass with all these characters, I did not enjoy this game as much as I would have liked because this game is hella hard. First off, there's a limit to how much you can use your mutant powers. There's also a lot of cheap traps in this game, and it's just way too easy to die. And once one of your X-Men dies, they're dead for the whole freaking game. It was rough, but I played it because it was X-Men. It was also the only game I had. But with Christmas coming up soon, I would soon be getting more games, including While I don't remember when or what order I got the majority of my Genesis games, I'm pretty sure Aladdin was the next game I got as an upcoming Christmas gift. And let me tell you, this game is fantastic. I love the movie, and this game does the film justice. I mean, look at these animations. Everything is just so smooth. And while the game did have quite a few hard parts, mainly this damn level, it's a really fun game. And funny enough, this was the first game I found out had cheat codes. Now, I was young, I had no idea what cheat codes were, but finding out that if you press A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and you would skip to the next level, it was mind-blowing. Again, I was really young at the time, and I didn't have any video game magazines, so I didn't know what cheat codes were. So finding out that cheat codes were a thing, again, like I said, mind-blowing. Speaking of cheat codes, a little bit later down the 90s, I got a subscription to Electronic Gaming Monthly. But before that, every now and then, when like my mom and I would go grocery shopping, I would beg her to get like a magazine of some sort. If it wasn't like a comic or a wizard magazine, it would sometimes be a good old GamePro magazine, all with its memorable rating system. Or maybe it would be a tips and tricks issue, which both magazines would have a list of cheats for a bunch of games in the back of the book. Finding out that there was cheat codes not just for my Genesis games, but for some of my past NES ones, it had me replaying a lot of my shit. But back to the games. At some point my dad picked up the game Side Pocket. This was more of a game for him, but I tried playing it a few times. Pool isn't exactly my jam, but I will praise this game for having a fun, almost underrated soundtrack. Early on, my parents got me Ren and Stimpy, Stimpy's Invention. Unlike the last Ren and Stimpy game I got for the NES, I actually found this game to be pretty fun. It's really zany and quite unique.
You stupid idiot! You stupid idiot! You stupid idiot! You stupid...
I believe this was actually the first video game I ever beat too. No cheats or anything, just straight up played it from beginning to end and beat it. I was so proud of myself. Some of the other games I got ended up being a little too hard for me to beat, like The Lion King.
It starts.
This game was brutal, but that was by design. Just take this stupid level for example. So much bullshit in just this one stage alone. Such a shame too, because like Aladdin, this game has some great visuals and sounds and decent game mechanics. Another pretty difficult game I had was Spider-Man and the X-Men and Arcade's Revenge. Spider-Man? Yeah! X-Men? Hell yeah! Spider-Man and X-Men in one game combined for the Sega Genesis? Hell freaking yeah! Like I mentioned, this game is hard, but I still love playing it. You get quite a few characters to choose from, including Wolverine, Cyclops, Gambit, Storm, and of course Spider-Man. Sure, most of the level designs are pretty poor, and visually the game isn't very appealing, but it features some of my favorite superheroes doing their superhero thing. Also, check out the soundtrack! The game can be frustrating, but Arcade's Revenge is a guilty pleasure of mine. Speaking of superheroes, I did have another Spider-Man title, and it's the one Sega Genesis Spider-Man game I haven't reviewed yet. It's simply titled Spider-Man, sometimes known as Spider-Man the Animated Series. This game features Spider-Man doing typical Spider-Man things, like wall crawling, web slinging, and beating up bad guys. However, this game, it's not the best, and that's mostly because of the gameplay physics. They are wonky as hell. It was a bit frustrating in parts, but with enough patience and dedication as a kid, I was able to beat this game too. On the upside of things, it's pretty cool that this game features a huge cast of villains to fight, and some of the sound effects are funny, like listen to the sounds these bats make when you punch them. Some of the background music is pretty rockin', which even includes the iconic 90s Spider-Man theme song. With that said, this game also has one of the most ridiculous and annoying songs I've ever heard in a video game before. And before I continue, I probably should have talked about this earlier, but we gotta talk about the Sega Genesis controller. What might look like a Batarang turned into a video game controller, this thing is actually pretty solid. As for the buttons, you got a D-pad, which, like the Master System, provides 8 directions. There's also a start button, as well as an A, B, and C button. I actually still really like the controller. As someone with big hands, this controller feels pretty comfortable. Sega eventually released a 6-button controller too. Regardless of which controller you use to play the system, make sure it's an official Sega controller. From my experience, we went through so many of those Mad Catz controllers. They were just so poorly made, and eventually, after playing with them for just a little bit, they'd have wire exposed right here on the top. No bueno. Now for the next game I'm going to talk about, I really got into it, and that game is none other than Earthworm Jim. I just adore this game. Earthworm Jim was another fantastic platformer. When this game released, it became an instant hit, and it's not hard to see why. It combines smooth, cartoony visuals, creative character designs, badass background music, zany sound effects, and fun gameplay. I quickly fell in love with this game, so much that when I was young I had little art books where I'd draw pictures of the cast and I'd make little comics on them. The game also had a poster that I moved all around my room for years until it eventually fell apart. I love this game, and I've bought it on almost every platform every time it gets re-released. The game would eventually see a sequel, Earthworm Jim 2, that I of course also bought. This game got even more wacky than the first. Maybe too wacky. While the game mechanics have improved a bit, which includes a variety of new guns and Jim's new sidekick Snot, to me this game feels like there's too many gimmicky levels and not enough straightforward head-whipping gun-shooting action. That's just my personal preference though. It's still a fun game, outside from seeing poor puppies being thrown out of a window to their death and exploding on impact.
Whoa! Whoa!
That's disturbing and sick. Why would they design something like that? So I had a few more games, including Micro Machines. I honestly don't remember where, when, or how I got this game, but it's a fun little racer. You get to pick which wacky racer you want, and you race. A weird little stipulation to this game is that you can win a race by simply outracing your opponent on screen enough times. Depending on the track, this can either work for you or against you. Weird, but a unique take that I like. I also had the game Toy Story. I absolutely love the movies, so much that when the movie came out on VHS, I wore the tape out. As for the game, it was pretty fun. I thought the graphics were pretty cool, and the developers did a really good job translating the movie to video game form. There are some rough parts here and there, but it's still a title I'd recommend. I wonder why this one doesn't get as much love as other retro Disney games. And for the last game I bought on the system, it was none other than X-Men 2 Clone Wars. How fitting that the last game I bought for the system was a sequel to the first game I bought for the system. And X-Men 2 upped the ante. Instead of 4 playable characters, there were now 7, as they added Psylocke, Beast, and frickin' Magneto. Not only are there more playable characters, but the gameplay overall has been improved. No more limitations on your mutant abilities. You can use those powers as much as you like now. Some characters even got some extra abilities, like being able to climb on walls. The music in this game is rockin', the level designs are improved, but damn, it's still hella hard. Overall though, I still find this game a joy to play. And that was it for games that I own, but thanks to friends of mine, I was able to check out a whole bunch of other games. One of my best buddies from back in the day had a Sega Genesis with a lot of cool games too. This was where I first played Sonic the Hedgehog 2. We played this a lot. With awesome graphics, fast-paced action, and a bunch of dope music tracks, how could anyone dislike this game? It's one of the best, if not the best game on the system. It's fun, and at some points, a bit terrifying. Nothing was more nerve-wracking than being trapped underwater and then starting to hear that counter ticking down. It was also cool playing with 2 players where player 2 could control Tails to help cheeseball boss fights and help win the bonus round. Saying this game is awesome is an understatement. My friend also had the game Mortal Kombat. Holy hell, this game was brutal, gory, and inhumane.
Finish him.
As far as games from the early 90s go, this was a game my mom didn't even want me to play, but sorry mom, what kid didn't want to play this game? Mortal Kombat was the game to play. Personally, I sucked at it. I couldn't pull off the fatality to save my life. Hell, I only picked Scorpion because I knew how to do his little hookshot attack.
Get over here. Excellent.
My friend and I would have sleepovers, and there was a few times we stayed up playing the various Mortal Kombat games. We also played a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The Hyperstone Heist was a fun little beat-em-up. We actually played all the TMNT beat-em-ups on all the various systems, and while I prefer Turtles in Time for the SNES over this one, Hyperstone Heist is still pretty awesome. We also played TMNT Tournament Fighters. That game was crazy hard. I didn't like it. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of this game is, fuck that.
Shock.
The early 90s was also a popular time for franchises like Jurassic Park. My favorite parts of the game were pretty much everything involving the T-Rex. Also, look at the Sega opening. It was actually kind of cool seeing how many games had unique openings with the Sega logo. But back to Jurassic Park, I also really like this opening cutscene. How terrifying! There were a few other titles my friend had, but it was nothing too noteworthy, like Green Dog and Mighty Max. Thanks to the video rental store that I bought the system from, we got to rent a bunch of games too! Some of my favorite games to rent included Rocket Knight Adventures. Woohoo! Look how awesome this possum is. Armed with a cool jetpack and a deadly sword, this little guy is ready to fight this pig army to the death. This game is so awesome for so many reasons. I'm not going to just repeat everything from my review of the game, but I will say that this game is worth checking out. In my opinion, it's one of the best games on the entire system. Another game we rented a lot was Maximum Carnage. Oh shit, look at this! How badass! This game is a pretty decent beat-em-up with solid visuals, cool cutscenes ripped straight from the comics, and fair brawling gameplay mechanics. The music in this game is probably the best part too. With its rocking soundtrack, you'll be pumped to kick ass. The downside is that this game is such a grind. The enemies fight in overwhelming numbers and you'll be fighting Carnage's goons non-stop. And once you get a game over, that's it. That was your only chance. How unforgiving. Another one of my favorites to rent was World of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. The best way to describe this game is charming. Charming visuals with charming level designs with charming music. And the best part is, not only is the game fun, there's 3 different playthroughs you can go through. Depending on if you play as Mickey or Donald, you'll play some shared levels, but each character will have their own exclusive ones too. And not only that, but if you play on 2-player mode, you'll also see exclusive levels. This game is just one of my favorites. Quackshot was a favorite too. In this game you play as an Indiana Jones inspired Donald Duck, and you go on a fun adventure that has you traveling around the world with a trusty plunger gun that frequently gets upgraded. Again, charming visuals and music. Disney games were just so rocking back in the day. Also, what franchise in the 90s was hotter than the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? We rented this fighting game quite a few times. All in all, these days I find the game just kinda okay. The fighting mechanics are alright. It's cool though that one round has you fighting the monster as a ranger, and round 2 has you fighting the giant version of that monster with your Megazord. That's how the show was. A real downside to this game is that it's pretty short. It's worth checking out though, just to hear all the funny voice clips. Now for the last game I want to talk about renting, I remember this one pretty clearly because there was so much hype around it. Now anyone else from this time period remember something called Hedgehog Day?
It's Groundhog Day!
Sonic 3 is coming
Look for the shadow!
on Groundhog Day. Make that Hedgehog Day.
Who wasn't hyped for Sonic 3's release? And on that day, February 2nd, 1994, we went down to the rental store and we rented the game. And good God, what a freaking game! Sonic 2 was already fantastic, so my hype level for the sequel was high, and man oh man did it meet expectations. This isn't just one of my favorite games on the console, I'd have to put it somewhere in my top 10 video games of all time. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 offered awesome new zones, new sick power-ups, crazy intense new bonus levels, and hey, when you played as Tails in this game, you could actually fly. Of course the music here is really killer too. I always thought it was kind of cool that this game was able to have such great storytelling without a single bit of dialogue, and one of the antagonists, Knuckles, instantly became one of my favorite characters. Speaking of Knuckles, Sonic & Knuckles was a crazy concept at the time. Both Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles are great on their own, but combining the two games is just epic. Because of this game, Sonic the Hedgehog became one of my favorite franchises. Just like how I used to draw comics of Earthworm Jim, I spent a lot of time drawing and making comics of Sonic 2. But not in that weird deviant art kind of way. Seriously, what is it about Sonic that makes that side of the fanbase so weird? Anyway, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is awesome. So the Sega Genesis, what a terrific console. So many memories I get just from talking about this, and I haven't even talked about one of my favorite experiences with this console yet. So as a kid, like most kids, we did chores around the house for money. Well, once I saw this thing that I'm about to talk about, I asked my parents if, instead of chore money, I could just have this instead. So I was fortunate enough early in its lifetime that my parents let me subscribe to Sega Channel. Being ahead of the curve, Sega offered one of the first video game streaming services. For a price of $12.95 a month, you got access to 50 Genesis games a month. You also got to play demos of yet-to-be-released games, and the games ranged from first-party titles to third-party. It was amazing! And on the first of every month, the games would change. I got to play so many video games because of this. We really got our money's worth, because when I got the chance, I would play anything and everything. This was where I played most of Sega's first-party games. All the classic Sonics were on there, including the spin-offs like Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine and Sonic Spinball. Later on, Sonic 3D Blast was there too. I was blown away by that opening. Nothing amazing looking today, but hey, it was different back in 1996. I also remember playing Echo the Dolphin. I had no idea what the hell I was doing in that game, but I remember thinking how beautiful and detailed the game was. I thought these graphics were so realistic and that there was no way they could get better than this. This was the pinnacle of realistic graphics to a young 90s kid. Echo the Dolphin and Echo the Tides of Time were tough, but luckily Echo Jr. had a different take on the gameplay that let me play my dolphin simulator in peace. The Streets of Rage titles were also amazing, with some of the best music on the console and kick-ass gameplay. I fell in love with this series. These heroes are awesome too. Look how badass Axel and Max are. And Blaze? Good God, Sega knows how to make kick-ass women. And what's also awesome was listening to these thugs scream as you kick their ass. Sega's other beat-em-up series, Golden Axe, was really fun too. I actually remember playing Golden Axe on an arcade cabinet in some pizza place beforehand, but now I had the opportunity to play this game at home. Like Streets of Rage, I just love smashing people to death and listening to them scream. Beyond Oasis was a game I really enjoyed as well. As a kid, I really didn't know what to do, so I just went exploring. I ended up saving a few of the elemental spirits, but I never finished the game. It's on my bucket list of games I need to beat. And, like the previous two games I mentioned, everyone you kill in this game screams too. Is Sega morbid for adding these effects? Or am I for enjoying it? Ristar was a hidden gem that I don't remember any of my friends playing or talking about at the time. This charming platformer had a unique gameplay premise. As Ristar, you stretch those arms out and headbutt enemies, and also stretch out to help travel around the stage and grab power-ups. This game is pretty fun. How did it never get a sequel? Speaking of one-hit wonders, Comic Zone was real unique too. You play as Sketch Turner, a comic book writer and artist and also a musician who gets sucked into his own comic book and has to fight his own creations to escape. This game can be pretty damn difficult unless you know exactly what to do in each panel. Every panel is either a puzzle or full of bad guys to fight. And for some reason, everything hurts you. It's somewhat disappointing that Super Sketch is teased throughout the whole game, but he's nothing more than just a little power-up. There were lots of other great first-party Sega titles I discovered through Sega Channel, like Vector Man, Dynamite Headdy, the Shining Force games, Kid Chameleon, Toe Jam and Earl, and Shinobi. But one of my favorite games I discovered was Phantasy Star 4. This game introduced me to RPGs and I fell in love with it almost right away. The combination of simple turn-based gameplay, anime-esque cutscenes, perfect mood-setting music, and a gut-wrenching story just makes me adore this game so much. It's one I recommend you go out of your way to play. As for third-party titles, oh man, this console is where I first got into the Bomberman series. It was good old Mega Bomberman I had to thank for this. This was another game I loved playing for its single-player mode, but I also loved playing multiplayer in. There was also the likes of the Bubsy games. I played them quite a bit when I was younger, but now, I can't really stand those games. The mechanics are just so awful. It feels like a magnet is pulling me with these awkward physics. I guess I was pretty patient as a kid to play this as much as I did.
What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong?
I also got my fix of Zombies Ate My Neighbors off Sega Channel 2. This game was great because there was nothing else like this on the console. The presentation here is freaking fantastic, and the game is fun to boot. You can play as either Beavis or young Claire Redfield, and you blast away zombies and a bunch of other horror monsters. I'm all about this. The Road Rash games were great too. I didn't have the patience to try and play the game from beginning to end, but I did really enjoy punching other racers and crashing my bike. Speaking of crashing and being a jerk, the Paperboy games were fun if you just felt like being reckless. I don't care who needs a newspaper, I determine what I do.
Service with a smile. Phew! What died in there?
So yeah, I played absolutely everything, whether it be playing some dinosaur pinball in Dino Land, building a house in Richard Scarry's Busy Town,
That was heavy.
or having a blast trapping monsters in Ultimate Kicks. These were good times. Another cool thing about the Sega Channel was that there was a couple of exclusive games on there. One of the big ones was Mega Man The Wily Wars, a Sega Genesis remake of the first 3 Mega Man NES games. This game was originally only released in Japan, but through the magic of Sega Channel, I got to play it here. Another Japanese exclusive was Pulse Man. This unique title was developed by none other than Game Freak, years before Pokemon was a thing. The game itself is actually pretty cool. The game Garfield Caught in the Act was not a Sega Channel exclusive, however there was a Sega Channel exclusive version of the game titled Garfield The Lost Levels. It was the same as the original, but with extra stages added. And a bit of trivia, at the time of this recording, that version of the game has never resurfaced. As of now, it's considered lost media. How sad! The Sega Channel definitely had a lot of good, awesome things going for it, but there's a lot of downside to it too. Because this was a streaming service in the mid-90s, the connections weren't so great. There were lots of times where I'd just be sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting for the game to load up, and then sometimes I'd get an error message. There was also lots of times where I'd be playing the game and all of a sudden I'd just get disconnected and booted back to the main menu. All in all, we had our cable repair guy coming down to take a look at our connection quite a bit. While the Sega Channel is dead today, man, I'd like to see a modern version of it come back. I know this is just big time dreaming, but if there was a small service charge to download Sega games every month, how cool would that be? Not just Sega Genesis games, but the likes of Master System, Game Gear, Sega CD, Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, and a bunch of other Sega published games from their post-console years. Holy crap, that would be epic. Not sure what the market would look like for it, but I'd gladly subscribe to that service. Sega, please bring me a modern day Sega Channel. I feel very fortunate that I was able to experience the Sega Channel, so to my mom and dad that let me do that, thank you. I love you guys. But back to the Sega Genesis. Man, there's just so many great games that I could talk about. I've already talked about a lot of the popular ones, but I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the lesser known games out there. For example, when was the last time you heard someone mention the game Bob? It was that game that featured that robot bug-looking dude. I never beat the game myself because I remember it being quite a long game, but maybe I'll revisit it sometime. I remember it being pretty decent. How about Boogerman? What a disgusting game. What sickos are actually into boogers? Speaking of gross out humor, there was also Beavis and Butthead. I tried to like this game, but every time I played it, I ended up just getting lost. A real good one though was Mayu Mallard and Cold Shadow. This game has you playing as Donald Duck, but in this game, he's able to turn into a badass martial artist. This game is awesome and pretty underrated. Anyone played the game Balls? Such a unique fighting game concept, crippled by poor gameplay and such an annoying soundtrack. It's only got like one song in this game, and it's this.
Oi! 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 Oi!
How about Awesome Possum? This game actually reminded me a bit of Bubsy, where you're controlling some animal mascot with terrible controls, and he's got cheesy quotes he'll spurt out throughout the game.
Awesome, awesome, kickstart the machine on spot.
I'm awesome.
I always found those judgmental animals so creepy too. Anyone play the Genesis version of Race Drive-In? It was hard to tell what was going on most of the time. I could not understand what was happening, but I played it anyway. It was all about crashing and seeing the replay. Anyone remember when 7-Up had Spot as their mascot? Give them a game, sure, why not? I remember having fun with it, but I'm not sure how it would hold up today. There were quite a few awesome superhero games too. Captain America and the Avengers was one of my favorites. It was a pretty good port of the arcade title. What kid back then didn't want to kick ass with the likes of Captain America or Iron Man? I never understood why Thor was missing from the game though. The Incredible Hulk also had a game which I reviewed a while back. The game is just so-so, but damn, the visuals on the Hulk look great. Punisher had a fun beat 'em up on the system too. You even got to play as Nick Fury. This game was great gun violence action. There was also a Wolverine game, which I had high hopes for, but I remember being kinda let down by. I love X-Men games though, so I'm definitely gonna have to try this one again sometime. Now on the DC side of things, there was also a few Batman games on the console. I tried really hard to like Batman Forever. I loved the movie as a kid, but this game, holy shit, this is awful. The controls are just terrible. You have to pull off a Mortal Kombat fatality just to use your gear. The Adventures of Batman and Robin though? Oh man, imagine a Batman action game but with almost Contra-like gameplay. And like Contra, this game is brutal in the difficulty department. The music though, is really badass. Listen to this. The graphics are really awesome too, and it literally pushed the console to its limits. Speaking of limits, Sega tried really hard to keep this console going, what with its Sega CD and 32X add-ons. Because I was so young, I really don't remember much advertising on those, nor did I know a single person that owned either of those, so I don't really have anything to say about them. So the Sega Genesis, what a plethora of awesome games that were on there. I played the hell out of my console, up until the point where the Sega Channel service got discontinued. And around that time, that's when the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation started becoming a thing. So once I got those, I kind of packed up the Sega Genesis. In the following years, I would continue to play some Genesis titles, but that was mostly through the many compilation packages that they released. I bought them all, even though they were games I played a million times. When I was starting up this channel, I started replaying a lot of my old childhood games. I was surprised to see how many felt just as fresh as I remember, and I was also a bit disappointed to see how poorly some games held up. I started discovering some games I somehow missed the first time around. Like I remember seeing Sparkster on the Super Nintendo, but I didn't realize there was a Genesis version that was completely different too. This is a sequel to one of my favorite Genesis games, Rocket Knight Adventures. How awesome! Also, there's Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. This game, as you would expect, has a killer soundtrack, but the whole premise, my god, it's ridiculous. But very on par with the Moonwalker movie. Splatterhouse was a series I got into later in my life, and how cool is it that Splatterhouse 2 and 3 were on this console? Brutal, gory mayhem right there for the taking. And after getting into series like Castlevania and Contra later on in life, I finally got Castlevania Bloodlines and Contra Hardcore to go through now. Bloodlines still offers that classic Castlevania gameplay style, but with the ability to play as your typical whipping Belmont or as a new spear-using character. Cool! Contra Hardcore is, well, what you would expect. Classic Contra craziness. But this time with more characters. Look at this! A wolf with sunglasses! That's hilarious! Yet, so cool. This is what I love about the console. Games were just so chaotic and random. The heroes would range from so many different shapes and sizes, and species even. It felt like developers weren't afraid to just try zany stories with zany characters. It's a creative era that feels dead compared to today. So, to wrap this all up, because there's still so many Genesis titles that I could talk about, good god, there's just so many. But to wrap this up, the Sega Genesis wasn't just a part of my childhood, it was my childhood. It integrated so many things I was into at the time, with movies, cartoons, shows, comics, and everything else I was into somehow being a part of a Sega Genesis game. Hell, even McDonald's was a part of it. I was the demographic. And like I mentioned in my NES video, I think I was born around the right time for video games. I feel like as I grew and developed, so did video games and what they could do. The games got a bit more advanced and complex, and so did I. The Genesis was a perfect fit for me, and what else can I say that I haven't already said multiple times in this video? I love the Sega Genesis. And that's my life growing up with the Sega Genesis. So, what do you guys think? What do you guys think of the console? Do you like the console? Dislike the console? Do you have any memories you'd like to share? Let me know. I'd love to hear that kind of stuff. I thank you guys for watching it. If you made it this far, I know it's kind of a long video, but just let me know what you think, and I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys watching this. I love you all. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Peace out.